I have felt the exact weight of armor that was never made for you. It pulled at your shoulders before you had a name for what was wrong with it. Not a stone, not a sling, something heavier, something borrowed, something someone else handed you and called it protection. In this moment, wearing it, you can barely lift your own arms. You have been trying to fight in someone else's gear for years, and you keep telling yourself the problem is your arms. It is not your arms. It is the armor. Somebody showed you what strong looks like. Maybe it was a parent who did not once cry in front of you. Maybe it was a voice on a stage, hands raised, words flowing out smooth and certain, while yours catch and stall. Maybe it was someone whose faith sounds like confidence every time she opens her mouth, and yours sounds like a question you cannot get rid of. You watched that. You admired it. And somewhere in the watching, you decided that shape was the one you had to grow into before I could actually use you. So you put it on, piece by piece. The posture, the vocabulary, the pace of the prayers. A version of calm you have not actually felt, but have gotten very good at performing. You picked up a whole set of equipment, built for somebody else's height, somebody else's stride, somebody else's kind of fight, and you have been dragging it around ever since, wondering why it never quite fits. Let me say this to you plainly, as you hear this before we go one sentence further. The problem was never your size. The problem was the metal. You were never meant to grow into that chest plate. You were meant to take it off. Picture a boy standing in a king's tent, being dressed for a war he did not start. The king meant well. He handed the boy the best equipment he owned, his own coat of mail, his own bronze helmet, a sword strapped over armor built for a grown man's shoulders, a soldier's years, a body that had already survived 100 fights the boy had not yet fought. It was the finest protection in the whole camp, and the boy tried to walk in it, and he could not take one full step. Soon I will give you his exact words, the ones he said when he took it off, and exactly what he picked up instead. Not yet. First, feel the weight of what you are still wearing, because so much of what you have been calling weakness was never weakness at all. It was the wrong equipment, fitted to somebody it actually belonged to, strapped onto a body it had not been measured for. You know this feeling from the inside already. The prayer that comes out, sounding like somebody else's testimony instead of your own actual voice. The way you brace before you speak in a room, bracing for a confidence you do not have and have decided you are required to fake. The stillness you perform in front of people who are struggling, when what is actually happening in your own chest is closer to static. None of that is you failing to measure up. That is you standing in another man's armor, wondering why your legs will not move the way his did. I did not build you for someone else's fight. I did not build you to move the way another person moves, pray the way another person prays, carry weight the way another person carries it. What fits you does not look like what fits them. It was never going to. You have been calling that a flaw in you. Hear it differently now, while you are still listening. It might be the first sign you have finally noticed the armor does not belong to you. That is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of it. Before the fight, before the open field, before anything you have been dreading gets one step closer, there is a piece of equipment sitting on your shoulders that needs to come off. Clasp by clasp. And I am going to walk you through exactly how the boy in that tent did it. Let me name the actual weight, so you stop mistaking it for your own failure. You wake up already tired. It is not from sleeping badly. It is from carrying metal you strapped on before your feet even hit the floor. The version of you that has to sound sure in the group chat. The version that has to bow your head a certain way so the people watching believe you are devoted. The version that has to answer, "I'm blessed," when someone asks how you are, because the honest answer felt too heavy to hand a stranger in a hallway. You have been suiting up for a fight before breakfast, every single day, and calling it faith. That is not faith, that is armor. Armor this heavy will exhaust a body. no matter how strong that body actually is. Say the part you have not let yourself say out loud. You are not tired because you are weak. You are tired because you have been carrying someone else's equipment across ground that had not been built for that particular weight. A coat of mail does not get lighter because the man wearing it is determined. It stays exactly as heavy as it was made. Determination just means he collapses later instead of sooner. You have collapsed before. Quietly. In a car in a parking lot, engine still running, wondering why you could not do the thing you had watched someone else do so easily. In the silence after a prayer, you performed instead of prayed, feeling further from me than you did before you started. In the specific shame of comparing your slow, uncertain faith to somebody else's loud, confident one, and deciding the gap between you was proof. Proof something in you had not developed correctly yet. Nothing in you failed to develop. You were reading the wrong instrument. You were measuring your own walk against a stride that was not yours to copy. I want to say one thing straight. You have needed to hear it stated without decoration. The exhaustion is real. I'm not telling you it is imaginary. I'm not telling you a better attitude would carry it more easily. Some weight is not meant to be carried more easily. It is meant to be set down. You cannot out-discipline a mismatch. You cannot pray hard enough to make another man's armor fit your own frame. And you have never once tested that armor on anything real. You only ever watched it work on somebody else. Think about the specific gestures you picked up without ever choosing them on purpose. The way you clear your throat before you speak up in a room, bracing the way somebody else braces. The exact phrases you reach for in prayer because they sounded holy coming from another mouth. Even though they feel like a costume in yours. The pace you force your own grief to move at because someone modeled healing as fast and tidy, and yours has not once been either of those things. None of that was assigned to you. You picked it up somewhere, thinking it was the price of being taken seriously by heaven. It was never the price. It was never even on the list. Here is the comfort underneath the diagnosis. The weight you are carrying is not a verdict on your character. It is not proof you love me less than the people whose faith looks effortless from where you are standing. It is only proof that somewhere along the way, somebody handed you their equipment, and you were too grateful, or too afraid, or too unsure of your own size to say it did not fit. You're allowed to say it now, out loud, or only in the quiet part of your own chest, where I can already hear everything you have not said yet. This does not fit. It was never going to fit. Nothing about needing to say that makes you smaller than the people still wearing theirs comfortably. It only means you were finally honest. Honest about the one thing almost nobody in that camp said out loud. Say it plainly, not as a confession, as a fact. This piece does not fit me. Not a failure, a measurement. You're simply describing what is true about a body and a shape that were not made to match. That sentence costs you nothing. It only feels like it does, because you have carried the opposite lie for so long you mistook it for humility. Take the armor off for a moment. Just here, just in this sentence, not to walk out unprotected, to see what was actually underneath it the whole time. You assumed there was nothing under there worth looking at. That is why you covered it so fast, so early, with somebody else's bronze. You thought the real you was too plain to send into anything that mattered, too quiet, too unsure, too slow to arrive at the confident version other people seemed to reach without trying. So you covered the plain thing before anyone got a good look at it, including you. Look at what I actually see under the metal, not the version you rehearsed, the one you keep hidden, because you decided it would not be enough on its own. I see the way you notice a person struggling before they say a single word about it. Nobody taught you that. It was already yours. I see the specific gentleness in how you handle someone else's grief. The same gentleness you almost never extend to your own. I see the questions you keep asking me in the dark instead of the confident declarations you have watched other people make in daylight. Those questions are not a lesser faith. They are simply your faith in your own voice, doing exactly what an honest voice does. You have been ashamed of that voice. You have practiced again and again, trying to sound like someone else's certainty. But certainty was never the measure I was using. Fit was the measure. And what fits you does not look, sound, or move like what fits the person you have been quietly comparing yourself to. Think about your actual hands for a moment, not the hands you wish you had, the ones you were given. They are steady in ways you rarely notice, because steadiness feels ordinary from the inside. They know how to hold a phone through a friend's worst night without needing to fix anything. They know how to write the honest sentence in a card instead of the safe one. They know how to stay in a hard room a beat longer than comfort would suggest, simply because staying was the actual need. None of that required borrowed bronze. None of it ever will. You were not assembled from spare parts. You were formed on purpose, with a particular shape that was never meant to be traded for someone else's. The parts of you that feel unfinished, unsure, too soft for what is ahead. Those are not the flaws you have been treating them as. They are simply yours. Nobody else was given that exact combination. Nobody else needs to approve of it for it to be true. I never gave you someone else's armor. Hear that where you are sitting. I gave you something else entirely. And it was not late, and it was not small. Here is the part that will take longer to believe than to hear. What actually fits you was placed there before anyone handed you their armor. It did not arrive late. It did not arrive small. It arrived complete the same day you did, and it has been waiting under the metal this whole time for you to notice it was already enough. Stop measuring your bare hands against someone else's chest plate. They were not competing categories. One of them was built to be worn by a stranger. The other one is yours, and it already knows exactly how to move. You keep asking me to make you louder, bolder, faster to answer, slower to doubt. I hear that request and it comes from somewhere real. I'm not dismissing it. But listen to what you are actually asking for underneath the words. You are asking me to melt you down and pour you into a mold that already has somebody else's name stamped on the bottom of it. I did not make that mold for you. I am not going to start now. Here is what I made instead. A steadiness small enough to miss, that shows up exactly when it is needed and never asks to be noticed. A loyalty that keeps returning to the same person long after everyone else has quietly moved on. An attention that catches the smallest shift in someone's voice before they have said what is actually wrong. None of that was ever going to look like equipment to anybody watching. None of it needed to. It was not built for an audience. It was built for the exact rooms you actually walk into. You have spent so much energy trying to be someone braver sounding that you have barely looked at who you already are underneath the disguise. Look now. Not to judge it, only to recognize it. That plain, quiet, particular shape is not the placeholder while you wait to become someone more impressive. It is the actual design. It was finished a long time before you started apologizing for it. Almost nobody warns you about this part of borrowed armor. It does not even protect you. You have been carrying it as if the weight itself were proof of safety. It is not. A chest plate built for another man's frame does not sit where it needs to sit on yours. It shifts when you move. It leaves gaps exactly where you are most exposed, because it was measured for shoulders that are not your shoulders, a chest that is not your chest. You have been bracing under something heavy, telling yourself the heaviness meant protection, when the heaviness was only ever heaviness. Nothing about it was actually covering you. Real protection does not feel like that. Real protection does not restrict your arms until you can no longer lift them to help the person next to you. It does not slow your feet until you cannot walk toward what actually needs you. Real protection moves with you. It was fitted to you specifically by me. long before you ever reached for someone else's equipment, out of fear that your own was not enough. I am your protection, not the persona you built, not the vocabulary you borrowed, or the calm you performed, or the version of confidence you copied from somebody whose life you only ever saw from the outside. Those things cannot cover you. They were never designed to. Only I was. You have been asking me to make the armor fit. Wrong prayer. I am not in the business of reshaping you to match equipment that belongs to somebody else. I am in the business of covering you exactly as you are, underneath it, the way I have been covering you the entire time you thought the metal was doing the work. Let your eyes close on this sentence and stay closed for a moment. I already know your exact shape, and I'm already covering it. Not the shape you have been performing, the one underneath. Stay there a moment before you keep reading. Let your shoulders remember what it feels like to carry nothing heavier than what was actually built to rest on them. Open your eyes when you are ready. There is nothing you needed to get right in that pause. I only wanted you to notice, for a handful of seconds, what your own body feels like without the extra weight you have been mistaking for safety. Here is what changes once you understand this. You stop needing the borrowed armor to survive whatever is ahead, because you finally believe the actual protection was never coming from the metal. It was coming from me. It still is. It was covering you on the exact days you decided to strap on somebody else's bronze out of fear that mine was not enough. Safety was never about looking formidable. It was never about sounding certain either. The boy in that tent was not protected by the armor he tried on. He was never going to be. His protection was standing in the field with him before he ever walked into it, the same way it has been with you, in every room you have carried this weight into without asking if you needed to. Think about what you have actually survived already, without the borrowed armor you keep assuming was the reason you made it through. The conversation you dreaded that turned out fine. The diagnosis that came back better than the fear had rehearsed. The room full of people you were sure would see through you, that simply let you sit among them, unremarkable, unbothered. You credited the armor for that. It was not the armor. You were covered the entire time by something you did not have to put on. It was never yours to wear at all. It was mine to carry. There is a difference between a shield you hold up and a shield that holds you. One tires your arm. The other one asks nothing of your arm at all. You have spent your strength gripping the first kind when the second kind was standing behind you, in front of you, around you, doing the actual work, while your hands stayed busy with something that was only ever decoration. Set the borrowed pieces down, one at a time, and notice what does not change when you do. You are upright. You are steady. You are never being held up by the metal. Here's exactly what the boy said when he took the armor off. I promised you his words, and I am not going to soften them or explain them away before you hear them plainly. He stood in front of the king who had just dressed him, and he said this, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. Not, I do not want these. Not these are too heavy for me. He said something more specific than that. I have not proved them. I have not yet tested this exact metal against anything real. I do not know what it does when it actually matters. Sit with that reasoning for a second, because almost nobody slows down for it. He was not being humble, and he was not making a point about trusting me more than metal. He was rejecting it because he refused to walk into anything real carrying a question mark. The armor was untested in his hands. His own equipment was not. His name was David. Say that name and picture him for a moment exactly as he was. Not a hero yet, a shepherd, younger than every soldier watching him, smaller than the man he was about to face. He took the armor off, piece by piece, in front of people who expected him to be grateful for it. Then he walked out of that tent toward the stream at the edge of the battlefield, carrying nothing that belonged to anyone else. 1 Samuel, chapter 17, verse 40. Here is exactly what happened next, word for word. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. Read that slowly. He stopped at a stream, with an entire army watching from one side and a giant waiting on the other, and in that exact moment, with everything at stake, he did not panic, borrow, or improvise. He chose, calmly, 5 stones, smooth ones. The kind his hand already knew how to find without looking twice, because his hand had done this exact motion more times than anyone in that valley could count. That calm was not courage, it was familiarity. His hand had closed around a stone that size, more times than the whole army behind him had swung a sword, and it knew the weight before his eyes confirmed it. He had done this 10,000 times before that day. Every single one of those times, there was no army, no king's tent, no crowd waiting to see what he would do. Just a boy, a sling, and whatever was actually trying to kill the flock that morning. That is why his hands did not shake at the stream. Not because he was fearless. Because his hands already knew this particular motion, the way your own hands know how to close a door you have closed 1,000 times, without ever once looking at the handle. A thing you have proved does not stop being proved because the crowd got bigger. It was not depending on one. He did not walk toward that field wearing anyone's armor. Not the giants, not the kings. He walked out carrying exactly what had already been placed in his hand, and nothing he had to borrow to make it look like enough. Everyone in that valley was watching a boy without a sword. He was standing there with the only equipment he had ever actually proved. The giant looked him over and mocked what he saw. A boy. No armor, no shield. Nothing that looked like a weapon anyone in that army would have chosen on purpose. He did not answer by pretending to be more armed than he was. He did not borrow the giant's language either, the sword and spear kind of confidence built on visible metal. He simply told him where his own strength was actually coming from, plainly, before either of them took another step. Not a boast about the stone, a statement about the source. I am not telling you this story, so you will walk away from it expecting your own giant to fall by tomorrow. That is not the promise sitting inside this. Some fields you stand on for a long season before anything changes about them. What I am telling you is smaller and steadier than a guarantee about outcomes. He did not need borrowed equipment to be who he already was in that field. Neither do you, whatever field you are actually standing in. I want to go somewhere deeper than identity now. Deeper than simply telling you what fits you and what does not. I want to talk about where the fit was actually built, because you have been misreading that part of your own story for longer than you realize. You have years behind you that nobody ever watched you survive. Seasons where you kept showing up to a small, unglamorous kind of faithfulness that never once made it into a testimony anyone else heard. Nobody was filming the nights you chose to pray instead of scroll. Nobody was watching the specific way you kept choosing patience with a person who gave you every reason to stop. Nobody clapped when you forgave quietly, without an audience, for the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th time. You have started to file those years under lost, under behind, under the stretch of your life where nothing important was happening while everyone else's story kept moving. Hear this the way he said it. Those years were not empty. Those years were the proving. That is where your own equipment was tested, long before anything real ever leaned on it. The boy at the stream did not learn to choose stones that morning. He learned it on a hillside nobody visited. Defending sheep, nobody thanked him for defending, in the exact seasons that looked, from the outside, like nothing was happening at all. I was there for every one of those unseen days. I was teaching his hands the whole time, long before there was an army, to watch him use them. Nobody else needed to see it for it to be real training. I was the only witness that mattered, and I never once looked away. I have been doing the same thing with you. Every quiet season you assumed was empty was actually full of exactly the kind of formation that only happens where no one is grading it. I was teaching your hands too, not for a stage. For the exact moment ahead of you that you cannot see the shape of yet. The same way the boy could not have named what a giant would look like on the morning he first picked up a sling. Breathe with me now, slowly 3 breaths in a row. Not a ritual to perform correctly. Only 3, taken one at a time. Draw the first one in, slowly. Let it be for the weight you already set down. The borrowed armor you finally admitted did not fit. Release it just as slowly, and notice something loosen across your chest as you do. Draw the second one in. Let it be for every unseen year you had been calling empty. Release it, and let that word leave with your breath. Not empty. Proved. Draw the third one in, fuller than the other 2. Let it be for what is already resting in your hand, whether you have noticed it yet or not. Release it slower than before, and stay inside that stillness a moment longer than feels necessary. You were never behind. You were not being left out of a story that mattered somewhere else, while your own hours amounted to nothing worth counting. Every ordinary hour you spent being faithful where nobody was watching was already the exact place your hands were being taught. It still is. It never stopped being that, not for a single one of the days you assumed it had. I am the one who taught your hands, quietly, not on a stage, not where your reputation could earn a single thing from the effort. I taught them the way I taught the shepherd's hands in a field nobody else walked into, so that when the day finally called for them, they already knew exactly what to do without you having to think about it first. That training was not wasted because nobody clapped for it. Training was never about the clapping. It was about the hand. Stop apologizing for the years that did not look like anything. They looked like nothing, because that is what formation looks like from the outside, every single time. It never looks like anything until the day it is finally asked to hold weight, and by then it is too late for anyone to call it nothing. Yours has already been happening. It is happening in you right now. Here is what I actually want from you now. Not a performance, not a louder version of your faith by the time anyone else notices. I want you to walk out of whatever tent you have been standing in and leave the borrowed pieces on the floor of it. All of them. The vocabulary you copied, the calm you faked, the pace of prayer that was never actually yours. Leave it there and walk out lighter, carrying only what was already in your hand before anyone tried to dress you in something heavier. You do not need to become someone else before I can use you. Read that sentence again. Slowly. You do not need to become someone else, not louder, not more certain, not more polished in front of a crowd that was never actually grading you the way you assumed it was. What I formed in you, specifically in the particular shape only you carry, is exactly what I intend to use. Not a future version of you that finally sounds like somebody braver. This version. The one reading this right now with the armor still half on, and the sling somewhere at the bottom of a bag you forgot you were carrying. Pick it up. Whatever it actually is for you. The quiet way you notice people before they say a word. The plain, unimpressive prayers you have been ashamed of. The years nobody witnessed, where your own hands were being proved without you noticing it. That is not the lesser equipment. That is the only equipment that was ever going to fit you, and no borrowed piece was ever going to improve on it. You are not behind the people whose armor looks shinier from where you are standing. You were never in the same race as them. Different field, different frame, different hand shaped for a different weight than the one they were built to carry. Stop measuring your stone against their sword. They were not made to be compared. I know you are still holding some of it. Some of the borrowed weight has not come off yet. That is fine. You do not have to set it all down in one motion. Set down what you can reach and leave the rest exactly where you can find it again. I am not timing how fast you undress from what was never yours. I am only asking you to keep noticing which pieces are not fitting, one at a time, and to keep choosing what was actually placed in your hand instead. This is the promise I am leaving you with. Not a louder future, not a stronger version of you waiting somewhere ahead once you have finally earned the right equipment. The promise is smaller than that, and it will outlast every other thing said to you this week. What I already formed in you is enough for what is actually ahead of you. It does not need to be traded in first. It does not need to be improved before I will use it. It only needs to be picked up, plain and unfinished, and entirely yours, and carried out into the field exactly as it already is. I never gave you someone else's armor. I gave you exactly what you already needed, long before you knew to call it that. And it has been sitting in your hand this entire conversation, waiting for you to finally stop apologizing for its size. Amen. Thank you for staying with this all the way to the end. If you want to leave one thing in the comments, leave this: the piece you are finally setting down. Just the one. Nobody needs the whole story of it.